Dan Dickau here for the Field of 68 Media Network. I'm your host of the Bulldog broadcast. First off, I want to thank one of our supporting sponsors, McGilvery Environmental, based just east of Coeur d'Alene. They do a tremendous amount of construction services in Western Montana, Idaho, Eastern Washington. They do a terrific job there. So check them out if you need some construction services. Again, they do a tremendous job. Thank you for their support. Should have a couple more sponsors lined up here in the next few weeks that I would love to share a little bit more about their businesses with you. But let's just get right to it. Gonzaga had a tremendous week, and one of the two opponents isn't necessarily going to thrill you with when you see the name on it and you see the final score. But I think it's a game that really kind of bodes well down the road to prepare them to be able to take care of the task at hand when you get to the WCC and some of the games that you play night in, night out throughout that week. But we'll first start off with San Diego State. Tremendous road win, 80-67. I thought Gonzaga did a really good job of setting the tone early with their physical play, defensively, bumping cutters, being engaged on the weak side, battling on the glass. The only downfall of that first half would have been Graham Ike picking up two fouls in about the first 75 seconds or so of the game. But, one of the things that was so great was that he responded in the second half, and he looked like the Graham Ike of last year, where he had 20 of his 23 points in the second half. But he and Ryan Nemhart really controlled that game throughout the second half. I mean, Ike duck-ins, screen dives, screen rolls, post-up position, tremendous work on the glass and just being a presence defensively. I think he thought he was great, looked like himself from last year. Ryan Nemhart controlled the pace. Some people might say, well, he had three turnovers, which is more than he's had in the other games combined this year. Well, you got to take a step back and look at and realize how good defensively San Diego State is. And, for a point guard to be in that many situations where you're making decisions, score it, move it, make a pass or a play to a cutter for a scoring opportunity, handle traps and pick and rolls, hard hedges and pick and rolls, changing of defenses in particular with full court pressure. I thought Ryan Nemhart was tremendous, and I think you're going to start to see some buzz starting to pick up for him in regards to national recognition, the All-American awards. I know it's early; it's 5 games in or so now, but those type of performances, he plays well down at the Atlantis. He plays well against Kentucky, UConn, UCLA. It's going to swell, and he's going to be talked about as a legitimate All-American candidate, and no different than Graham Ike. It's kind of one of those things where a lot of national media pundits have to pick one or the other off of a team who they're going to kind of highlight on some of their stuff in their preseason publications, and Graham was the guy that got those early. But Ryan keeps playing the way he is. I think you're going to start seeing his name pop up even more. So those were tremendous, signs, I thought. A couple things a little concerning out of that SDSU game, but are very correctable, very easy to fix in my eyes, is, shooting from the perimeter on the road. This is their first road game. And so, that, and in a tough environment against a really good defensive team that tries to take away the three in San Diego State. They were 5 of 20 from beyond the arc. Hickman was 0 of 3, only had 6 points. Nemhart was 1 of 5 as well, but I thought the threes were the right shots to take. I can only think one or two maybe that were a little bit rushed. But again, that's how Gonzaga plays. They want to play fast. They want to be decisive. If they got an open shot, let it fly and think twice or think later after you let it go. So the other thing will be something to keep an eye on is I thought Khalif Battle, as good as he's been early in the season, had some struggle moments against the Aztecs, just being in that environment, having a couple possible calls that he thought he could have gotten on the offensive end not go his way. I thought it kind of, he didn't play with that positive emotional edge that he showed the first 3 games. I thought he bounced back and controlled those emotions much better against Long Beach State, which, you see it where He comes back and has 15 points, and you look at some of the positives he brings. He can score in bunches. He's an explosive scorer. He can score at the rim. He can score deep three. He can score putting his head down and kind of getting into the paint. So, that's one of those things where sometimes kind of getting into the mix, getting into the groove of a new group like he has might take a while, and the transition's been almost seamless. But Gonzaga hasn't faced a lot of adversity yet, and in particular adversity on the road, like they saw at San Diego State with 11, 12,000 screaming fans. The intensity and the pressure of the situation, but I'm not too concerned about that. You lead into the Long Beach State game. I thought that was a great game because of how they played for about 33 minutes of the game. They mid to late first half was a little bit of a struggle. They had some defensive lapses that allowed Long Beach State to get a couple buckets on the glass, a couple breakdowns defensively, gave them an open three or two, and then they struggled offensively for a couple minutes as well after those defensive lapses. But these are the games you have to take care of, just like when you get into the dog days of league where you're expected to win by X amount and you still have to go out there and perform, and you have to perform at a high level if you're going to continue to progress towards your goal of making a deep March run, which I think this team is poised and ready for. I wanted to touch on some of the things that stand out to me analytically for Gonzaga before we touch on the battle for Atlantis, which kicks off later this week in the Bahamas. But you look at Gonzaga right now, they're basically flip-flopping 1 and 2 in KenPom as I record this. 2 days ago, they were sitting at number 1 in KenPom. Today, as I record this, they're sitting at number 2, flip-flopping with Houston, as I mentioned. Gonzaga's got the number 1 offense in the country pretty easily. Their defense is ranked 17th. And, the one thing I think it was Houston's 4th offensively, 3rd defensively. But those are all numbers that are super early in the season. You're only 5 games in for Gonzaga. I think Houston's 6 games in now, if I'm not mistaken. So these things kind of, it over the course of a college season where you typically, if you like Gonzaga, you play deep, mid-30s games. You start to really get a feel analytically for where you fall probably 12 to 13 games in. Especially with Gonzaga, the strength of schedule they play early, it bolsters it, and then they continue to analytically stay even or get better as the season goes on, just because you're going to see a lot of great defensive performances. And then clearly on the offensive end of the floor, as we've seen in years past, they'll have some of those, 1.2, 1.25 points per possession games during league. I mean, Gonzaga in the opener against Baylor was 1.44 points per possession, and that's almost an unheard of number. So essentially, every time you get the basketball, you're scoring 1.4 points. So if it were a 100 possession game, you would be scoring 144 points, and that's almost unheard of. But wanted to compare the KenPom numbers versus when Gonzaga went to a Final Four in 17 and 21. In 17, Gonzaga was 16th offensively in efficiency and number 6 defensively. In 21, they had the number 1 offense in the 11th ranked defense. So right now, this team, the way it's trending analytically, matches up very favorably to those two teams. And, Gonzaga's led offensive efficiency through KenPom, I think, 3 of the last 5 years. So that should stay, top 3. I think over the long haul, you need to be consistent to have a legitimate shot at a Final Four. You should be top 15-ish in both of those categories. Very rarely you're going to see a team that's top 5 in offense and 65 in defense make a deep run. On the flip side, very rarely you're going to see a team top 7, 8, 10 defensively and 70th in offense make it to a Final Four. You got to have a balance in a mix of both and excel on both ends of the floor. And I think this Gonzaga team has that. Now, when you look at the battle for Atlantis, 3 games in 3 days in a tropical, humid environment, it makes you think, okay, are they going to change the rotations a little bit? Are guys going to play maybe some limited minutes, especially early in the first half of at least the first game, possibly the second, depending on matchups, and if they advance in the first game. So I think that's something you might see. Traditionally, Gonzaga has been an 8-man rotation, but you've seen Enechenti have the ability to earn some minutes. I think really think they want to get Diani in and get him as many minutes as possible. So I could see potentially 10 getting fairly good size of minutes down in the Bahamas. But first game matchup against West Virginia out of the Big 12. A lot of Gonzaga fans are going to remember the Jordan Matthews shot to advance to their first Final Four in 17. I'm sure that will be replayed on the broadcast on ESPN. But new coach, new everything for the program at West Virginia. Darian DeVries had a successful run at Drake, where his son Tucker played for him for 3 years. Last year, Tucker averaged over almost 22 a game a season ago at Drake. He takes the job at West Virginia. Tucker follows him, as you can imagine. And so I think not knowing a lot of how Drake played last year, I do know they were fairly 3-point dependent. I would imagine that would be the same thing. Tucker this year is only averaging about 13 and a half a game, but I would imagine that kind of starts to shift as you get in deeper into the season with more quality opponents, and you got to get better looks for your better players. But they're led in scoring by point guard Javon Small, averages about 16 a game, 4 assists per game. Tucker DeVries, who I mentioned, and then Jonathan Powell, really nice freshman when you look at size, you look at stats. 12 points, a little over 2 rebounds per game. So Gonzaga is going to have to do a good job with them. I think then it leads to, I would anticipate Gonzaga gets that win and advances to play the winner of Indiana Louisville. Either way you look at it, you're going to play one of those two teams. So you kind of look at both teams. For Louisville, completely new roster. I think it's one returning player from a season ago. Pat Kelsey's in his first year as head coach there after doing a really good job at College of Charleston. The thing about them is they are almost as analytically driven as anybody in the country. Had a chance to talk with him last year at the NCAA tournament in Spokane when I called the games for West One Radio, and he really talked about threes, paint touches, and putting pressure on the defense to get fouled and get to the free throw line. So that's really what they chart. They want threes, layups, essentially 6 feet and in at the rim, and get fouled and get to the free throw line. So that's what you're going to see out of Louisville if Gonzaga faces them. If they face Indiana, that's another chance for them to get a quad one win. And it's crazy to think we're talking quad ones already late November. But Indiana's a really good basketball team. Everybody knows Umar Ballo, who started his career at Gonzaga, went to Arizona when Tommy Lloyd headed down there. And now he is playing for Coach Mike Woodson at Indiana. And numbers are a little down this year as opposed to maybe last year, averaging 12 points, almost 10 rebounds a game, but like 68, 69% from the field. He's definitely found more of a niche, more of a path at Arizona and at Indiana than he did at Gonzaga. So I'm sure a lot of Gonzaga fans will be rooting for him in some way, shape, or form, at least to play well, not for his team to win. But the other name that's really interesting to note of Indiana is the point guard of Washington State season ago, Miles Rice, who had a great freshman year. I think he averaged about 13 points, 4.5 assists or so a year ago. He's at Indiana averaging 15 and about 4.5 assists this year, shooting 59% from the field as a point guard. Unbelievably quick. He is right-hand dominant, but he's so quick he can get back to that right hand pretty easily. Doesn't shoot a lot of threes because he puts so much pressure on the defense in transition and getting to the rim off of isolations as well as dribble handoffs and pick and rolls. So got to keep an eye on him. And then their leading scorer, Mackenzie Mokbo, I believe that's how you pronounce it, or Daco, sophomore, averaging almost 20 a game. He had 31 in their last game, Southern Illinois, SIUE. So really good score on the wing. Gonzaga, if they match up with them, has to really do a really good job of taking care of him. And then the other player that averages in the double figures for Indiana is Malik Renault, 14, about 6 rebounds per game, only a sophomore, but long, pretty athletic. That if Gonzaga could face West Virginia and then Indiana, that would be a great path to potentially facing who we all think would be the other side of the bracket team that's advancing on, and that's Arizona. And that's, quite frankly, what a lot of Gonzaga fans are looking forward to, wanting to see. Some people are going to say, well, Arizona's got the easier side of the bracket. Well, you could say that, but you also got to go out there and win those two games. And Arizona's coming off two losses for the first time under head coach Tommy Lloyd. Uh, and those were big time games. One was on the road at Wisconsin. John Tonje dropped 41 against Arizona. They didn't look great defensively. They looked like they struggled at times on offense as well, which is something new for Tommy Lloyd's teams. You know, he learned a lot of his philosophies from Coach Few, and he had a lot of ideas that he bounced off Coach Few that Coach Few has ended up using over the years. So you take that struggles on the offensive end, and then you go back to Tucson and you host Duke. Last year, Arizona goes into Cameron, wins. This year, Duke returns the game in a home and home, which I think is fantastic. And they just didn't look good on offense. I thought Duke's length, activity on the defensive end took Arizona out of everything they wanted. Cooper Flagg looked really good. Con Knipple for Duke looked really good. Malowatch on the interior, his length really posed problems. But I think a lot of it for Arizona was also self-imposed on the offensive end of the floor. Caleb Love, who is kind of one of those guys, hit or miss. He can get going in a hurry. He can score a lot of points in no time, but he can also struggle, and he has struggled really badly this year, averaging around 10 a game, about 32% from the field. But he's one of those guys where even if he's struggling, you got to be concerned that he could go for 25 in a night because he gets one to go in. He thinks there's a neon green light ready to go for him to keep searching for shots and hunting for shots. But they're really they are a deep team. They've got pretty good size on the interior, but the strength of their team is on the perimeter. Their three leading scorers are all ball handler, decision maker wings. I wouldn't call any of them a point guard by any stretch. And that's Jaden Bradley, averages almost 16 a game, and KJ Lewis for around 12 points a game to go along with Caleb Love, who, like I said, is averaging 10. But that's the game that everybody's looking for. That's the game that everybody wants to see. But Gonzaga's got to take care of everything leading up to that one. So if you get through this stretch, you're looking at, big time win against Baylor, big time win against San Diego State, a good win against Arizona State that at the end of the year, I think is going to look better than you thought it was when you played the game. And so, you're going to start seeing Gonzaga starting to be talked about as the number one team in the country. They're already ranked number 3, clearly. They're getting a few votes, but if they can get through this Battle for Atlantis tournament, I think you're going to start seeing, a lot more people really, truly talking about Gonzaga is the best team in the country. And I know, again, it's still early. We're 5 games in. After they come back from the Atlantis, that'll be 8 games in. You got a 1-week break before now you got to gear up for a Kentucky matchup and a UConn matchup. So this next 5 games, I mean, you're talking about Indiana, traditional blue blood, had a few years of a struggle, but they're really good this year. You're talking about potential Arizona, who consistently has been in the top 20 for however long, and there's that added juice of Tommy Lloyd being the head coach down there. And then Kentucky and UConn, who are clearly blue buds, and you can't sleep on West Virginia either because they have been really good. They're in the Big 12, so they're going to be tough. They're going to be physical, and that game also could potentially be a great quad 2 type of game down the stretch when that stuff really starts to get talked about. Because the Big 12 is kind of just going to bolster each other with their analytics as the season goes on. So thanks for listening to week 4 of the Bulldog broadcast on the Field of 68 Media Network. We'll be back next week. We should have a guest. It was just one of those things with the travel schedule for a number of people leading up into Thanksgiving. It was hard to track someone down, whether it was on staff or a couple former players I reached out to. Just wasn't a good weekend to reach out, but we will be back next week. We should have a guest. Might be a surprise. We'll see who it is. But thanks for listening. Again, thank you to our sponsors, in particular, our supporting sponsor, McGilvery Environmental. Check them out, as I mentioned. So thanks again. Have a great Thanksgiving and enjoy the Battle for Atlantis. It should be 3 great games in 3 days.